So we're going to go over the endocrine system today. I absolutely hate anatomy. But here's the cool part about the endocrine system. It's chemistry. No, that makes it better. See, ultimately, all of these systems can be reduced down to their individual components, and you look at the way the components interact. And the way these components are going to interact is through chemicals. They're going to interact through particles released by the cells. The endocrine system is all about signals, all about controlling things, all about bossing things around. Now, I've been getting to know you guys for the semester, and I know that there's a good number of you who really enjoy bossing other people around. You're like the endocrine system. You make things work. So this controls the body through secretion of regulatory hormones. We're going to also, the endocrine system is going to be highly responsible for homeostasis, keeping everything constant in the body. You got all sorts of parts of it. The adrenal gland, the brain, the testicle, the ovary, the thyroid, the pituitary gland, the thymus. They're all sending different signals to different parts of your body, saying, get moving, do this, do that. You've all heard of hormones. You probably heard, probably back during health class or something, you talked about what hormones are doing to your body right now. These hormones aren't like special, I don't know, well, they are special signals. They don't do anything more than just tell your body, okay, switch this process on now. Okay, turn that one off. We've got to make sure that you keep some water in your body. Okay, there's too much water in here. Let's get some out now. They deal with insulin, with the amount of sugar in your blood. Okay, tricky Bio 101 questions here. How is energy stored in animals? Okay, that wasn't that tricky then. Yeah, it's glycogen. So that glycogen is long-term storage. If you don't have much sugar in your blood, you've got hormones that'll say, okay, start breaking that glycogen down into simple sugars. And then, if you've got too much sugar in your blood, which for the most part most of us do right now, it switches back the other way and says, okay, start building more glycogen. Hey, what happens for you anatomy type people when you have too much glycogen? It becomes a fat. That for even longer term storage, in case the winter comes. So hormones are the signals. The way they work is they're going to bind onto receptors in the cell. There are all sorts of receptors in the cell membrane, whether they're G proteins or other receptors. They're going to have a specific shape, a specific form, a specific conformation that will accommodate the hormone. When the hormone binds, it will cause something to happen inside the cell. So some cells or some organs, some cells and some organs or tissues will produce hormones. Those hormones, if you remember about hormones, are not terribly water soluble. They don't dissolve well in water. So a cell will secrete the hormone, a protein will bind to that hormone and cause it to become water soluble, at least for the short term. That water-soluble hormone then travels through your blood, highway system of your body. Eventually, as it's moving, it's going to interact with other cells in other regions. It'll bind to receptors on those cells and cause something to happen in those cells. In this way, I don't know, your thymus gland can produce a hormone that can interact with something going on in your intestine. It's all about moving through the blood. Now, these endocrine glands are located all over the body. In case you wanted to know, in order to figure out what a gland was, if you were accidentally is the total wrong word. If you have a body opened in front of you, one, it's not going to be an accident that it got that way. So if there's a body sitting in front of you and you're poking around in it, you know, for funsies, and you find a group of tissues that looks a lot like gum or cottage cheese, think glands. The pituitary gland is located at the base of the brain. If you pulled out the brain of that pig, you may have found this sort of chewy substance underneath. It might have popped off when you pulled it out because we're not surgeons yet. But keep practicing, and you'll be able to pull out a pituitary. It's at the base of the brain. It's going to produce hormones. The thyroid. It's located in the back of the neck. Now, this is not to be confused with the lymph nodes. The doctor's not feeling your neck to find your thyroid, but that's where it is. If there's an issue with the thyroid, this is kind of cool. If there's an issue with the thyroid will grow. One of the issues is the thyroid will grow, especially with an iodine deficiency, and that's how you can get a goiter. See old people walking around with like this huge swollen neck? That's what happened. Yes?
So for like a lot of medications, like lithium especially, you know how you have to check your thyroid, like I think it's like every 2 months?
I honestly don't. Sorry.
Oh.
Keep going, Emily. You seem to know more.
Okay.
How does lithium work?
You take it, and then the thyroid, I was asking, like, I'm not sure what it does, but I know that you literally have to get your thyroid checked every, like, 2 months in case complications arise, because it's really easy for it to happen.
Yeah, to make sure it's still functional.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, like a goiter grow? What
It's probably not a goiter in that regard. So lithium is a very potent agent that will bind to a lot of different cell types and cause those. So it'll bind to receptors and cause things to happen within the cells. I'm not sure what it would do to a thyroid cell or to the cells of the thyroid, but they may be concerned about that.
Specifically is the thyroid that they have to check over and over again. It does not stop having to be checked.
Okay. Oh yeah. The adrenal glands, they're going to be located on the top of the kidneys. Remember those bean-shaped things? You pulled out that whole organ block, you looked and you saw, hey, look, there's little bean things. Sitting on top of them are these little pieces of chewing gum that are the adrenal glands. The pancreas is in there somewhere. It's behind all the other stuff. It's going to also produce different hormones. Specifically, that'll produce insulin, and there's one other one that it produces, but I forget what it is. We'll get to it soon. So you got all of these sites all over the body producing hormones. They're also producing the proteins necessary to make those hormones water soluble so they can get transported through the blood. Each cell will have different receptors on it. Those receptors may increase or decrease in both quality and quantity depending on the needs of the cell. So we're seeing a lot of intracellular, intercellular interactions where something that happens in one part of the body can affect what's happening to the structures of cells on the other. So some cells will bind to the exterior, some hormones will bind to the exterior of the cell, G proteins. This is called plasma membrane hormone receptors because simply they are hormone receptors on the plasma membrane. Some hormones, though, especially lipid-soluble ones, will be able to pass directly through the phospholipid bilayer. And if they do that, they can interact directly with a different part of the cell. They might interact directly with the nucleus or directly with the endoplasmic reticulum. There are hormone receptors inside the cell as well as outside the cell. So like I just said, some cells get across through simple diffusion across the plasma membrane. What is diffusion? Back to that. That's a very simple concept, but I want to make sure we all got it. Okay, I thought it was a simple concept. What is diffusion? It's not water. That's, wait. Water doing that? It's not water. That's osmosis. Solute, right. It's all about solutes moving. So this is operating passively through diffusion. That means in order for this to work through diffusion, there has to be a high concentration of that hormone outside of the cell. The way it gets there, the way it's building up, is you build up a certain level of hormone in the blood, in the body's fluids, so that it can diffuse from this high concentration on the outside to the low concentration on the inside. One way they can work is they can directly bind to DNA. If you're able to get through the plasma membrane, through the nuclear membrane, you can end up directly binding to DNA and stopping certain proteins from being produced, or forcing some to be produced even faster. Transcriptional control. Another way they work is they bind to the G proteins, these exterior plasma membrane-bound proteins. When they bind, they cause something on the inside to be released, or something on the inside to be phosphorylated, causing a change of the internal environment. That causes a signal cascade. So one product leads to it becomes the reactant in another reaction that produces new products, and you get this big cascade of events happening on the inside. It's almost like dominoes, but especially with dominoes, if you think about how not just a straight line, but they branching off. So it's you push one domino and you get 6 different effects. Now there are going to be 3 types of hormones: lipid-derived, amino acid-derived, and peptides. Lipid-derived proteins are very, very, very similar to cholesterol because they're derived from lipids. I love these terms that have, like, literally they tell you exactly what it is. Describe a lipid-derived hormone. Well, it's a hormone that derived from a lipid. And that lipid in this case is cholesterol. So if you look at testosterone, so here's an androgen, here's an estrogen, glucocorticoid, and cortisone. They all have the exact same basic structure. They're all derived from cholesterol. Cholesterol, this isn't going to help anybody who's watching this video. Cholesterol looks like this. That's cholesterol. That's testosterone. They all come from, and the rest of them are just one extra branch. Not much difference. You might have amino acid-derived hormones. These are going to be very small molecules. If you look at them, they're just basically a single amino acid with a few functional groups added to it. Phenylalanine, tyrosine, and now we're getting into how dopamine's created. So here's dopamine, here's phenylalanine. Look at the difference. Not much. Same basic structures. And then you got your peptide hormones. Your peptide hormones are going to be a polypeptide chain. They're like proteins. They're considered hormones because they transfer signals. They don't actually digest anything or break anything down. They're not catalysts. Their whole role is signaling. So those are the 3 types of hormones: lipid-derived, peptide, and amino acid-derived. Questions so far? Great. We have 3 ways of releasing hormones. Everything comes in 3s, it seems. Humoral stimuli, hormonal stimuli, neural stimuli. For humoral stimuli, this comes from, history sidebar, the humors. Have you ever heard of the 4 humors when looking at how to heal people? All right, so back in the day, back when we had barbers doing both surgery and cutting your hair, there's this idea that the body was made up of 4 different humors. Let's see if I can get this. Black bile, is it black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. And in order to be healthy, those 4 had to be in balance. And that's why they would do bloodletting, because they were trying to say, okay, you've got too much blood right now. Or there's too much phlegm, you have to get rid of your phlegm. Imagine having to get rid of phlegm because, you're coughing. This is the same idea. So this humors, right? It's all about liquids. In this case, these are going to be responses to extracellular fluid levels or ion levels. Are there too many sodium ions out there? Too few. What's going on in the fluid level outside of the cell? So if you're going to detect these fluid level differences or levels of ions, you've got humoral stimuli. You could have hormonal stimuli. In this case, get this, it's a hormone released in response to another hormone. And this happens a lot. One hormone kicks on and tries to boss the other ones around, and they do what they're told. It's the leader of a group of leaders. And then you've got neural stimuli. Sometimes you get a signal from the nervous system. In fact, a lot of times you get a signal from the nervous system. And that's going to cause a hormone to be released elsewhere in the body. So hormones can be released either due to changes in fluid levels or ion levels, stimulation of a nerve, or stimulation based on other hormones being released. All right, so now we've gotten the message out. We've got to regulate these things because you don't want to constantly produce hormones all the time. Hormone levels ultimately get controlled through negative feedback. Feedback inhibition, where the end point of a process feeds back and inhibits the beginning part of the process. So rising levels of hormones are going to inhibit further hormone production. The way I always explain this to my 101 students is think about the that family that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They used to be on like TLC. It was like 21 kids and counting or something like that. They produced a lot of offspring. Think of anybody who produces a lot of offspring. Negative feedback would be you've got the mom, A, producing a child who grows up to become an adult, D. That adult does not want to have additional offspring. So they feed their mom some birth control. Well, that doesn't stop all of the other kids in the pipeline, but it does prevent further production of offspring. Now, if you have a lot of kids produced, all of these Ds, and all of them got together and decided they didn't want their mom to have any more kids, each of them slipping their mom additional medication or preventing them from her from mating in some way, you stop the production of other offspring. Negative feedback. So if a hormone is in high concentration or goes into high concentrations, it can feed back in and stop that same hormone from being produced. So due to this regulation, these hormones are used to maintain homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is maintaining internal body conditions. So here's one example, body temperature. Your body can get too hot or it can get too cold. Have you guys ever, none of you guys ever overheated? Hyperthermia? It sucks, right? What happens? Your body temperature goes up. That's the first thing that happens. You may not even notice it. Your blood vessels, as a result of your body temperature going up, your blood vessels dilate. So that results in more heat loss to the environment. You're giving off more heat. Your sweat glands start to secrete fluids. So now you got this water on the outside of you to cool you down because water has a high specific heat. As that fluid evaporates off, your body temperature cools. So ultimately, heat's lost to the environment, and you get a normal body temperature. You've maintained that internal 37 degrees Celsius. You can go the other way, hypothermia. It gets too cold. Your body temperatures begin to fall. If that happens, your blood vessels constrict. They get tighter. That stops blood flow from going to your extremities, or you're going to cool off faster. Sweat glands stop producing fluids because you don't want to sweat when you're too cold. You might start shivering. So your muscles start to twitch on and on and off, on and off. That produces heat, and that heat warms the body. So you retain heat until you get back to a normal body temperature. Homeostasis. Your glands are working overtime to maintain homeostasis. For example, antidiuretic hormone. This is produced in the hypothalamus, in the brain. Its job is to trigger reabsorption of water by the kidneys. You've got to maintain the right amount of water in your body. So what's going to happen is, we talked briefly about osmosis, aldosterone, which is a hormone produced by the adrenal cortex of the kidneys, then enhances sodium reabsorption from the extracellular fluids. Okay, you got one thing clicking on in your brain that says, we need to keep more water. What are we doing here? We're reabsorbing water. All right, we need to get water out of the blood. We've got to pull this water out. So we need to get water into the cells. Another hormone clicked on by that first hormone. So we've got a hormone-mediated response. It says, okay, we're going to up the level of sodium in the environment. If you've got a lot of sodium sitting inside the cells are bringing in sodium like crazy. Osmosis will occur. Tiffany, what were you saying about osmosis? Water moves where?
From high concentrations to low concentrations.
Right, so water's going to move from a high concentration of water to a low concentration of water. In other words, water's going to move from a hypotonic solution, which is now the blood, to a hypertonic solution where all of that sodium is. So water's pulled out. You're maintaining the level of water. So if it's pulled into the kidneys, what can the kidneys then do with that water? What's part of the job of a kidney? What do kidneys do? They filter the blood. And what do they do with water? They're filtering out, right? Okay, what leads from what goes out of the kidneys? What? Urine, right? How do you make that urine? What do you use for that? Not trying to trick you. Water. So what the kidneys are doing is you're using that sodium. This is the physiology part of anatomy. This is the fun part. In my head. You're pulling water out of the blood through all of that sodium building up in the kidneys. Water's flooding in. The water will then be able to be used to, it'll be excreted. It'll be used to produce urine, but that urine's not going to be as highly concentrated as other urine might be. So when you're getting rid of water, you're going to notice your urine gets highly diluted. It's not that like a dark color. It's a very light color. So we can regulate our reproductive cycle too. God, you guys know that one. Reproduction system is highly, highly controlled. You've got the gonadotropins, follicle-stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, both of which are produced by the pituitary gland. Here's the way they work. So follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates sperm cells to mature. So males have they're not constantly producing sperm. Contrary to popular belief, it's not happening all the time forever and ever and ever. The production of mature sperm will only happen in the presence of follicle-stimulating hormone. So it starts production not throughout the entirety of the male's life or the entirety of the male's day. It's not like he wakes up and is like, gonna produce some more sperm. It only happens when necessary. Otherwise, that's a huge waste of energy. It takes a lot of energy to make cells, especially gametes. That sperm production is inhibited by a hormone called inhibin. You can tell this is an early hormone. We were really, really interested in the way sperm worked early on. They're like, this is inhibiting things. We'll call it inhibin. In females, that same hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, stimulates the maturation of egg cells. Luteinizing hormone is going to work in conjunction with it, and that creates estrogen and progesterone. So luteinizing hormone is another one of the examples of a hormone leading to the production of more hormones. It's the first domino in a series. So you've probably heard of estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen is going to be produced to trigger secondary sexual characteristics. So as people are developing, they go through puberty, you get differences in the level of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. If you have a high level of estrogen, you start to develop secondary female characteristics, which is why some males later in life, as their testosterone levels diminish and their estrogen levels increase, maybe through what they're eating or through systems starting to fail, they begin to develop secondary sexual characteristics of females. They begin to develop breasts. They begin to, their hips get wider, all sorts of issues, because of the way the hormones are triggering. We all have the instructions for building both sexes inside our bodies. It's just a question of turning one on or turning one off. I would do, in case you forgot, the X and Y chromosome don't work by saying on the Y chromosome are the instructions to build a penis. That's just not the way it is. Those instructions are in all of our bodies. If you were given the right hormones at the right time, you would be a different gender. Yeah. No, a different sex. Sorry, you guys taking sociology at all? Okay, what's the difference between sex and gender? Sex is biology, gender is, got it. Sorry, I'm trying to keep my terminology the same because that's not something I ever learned. So, your sex is determined by the hormone levels at different points in your life. Progesterone, on the other hand, interacts with estrogen to regulate the production of milk and the acceptance of the fetus. It also controls the onset of labor. So if you have to be induced for labor, what they end up doing is giving you a massive amount of progesterone, hypothetically. When you're looking at home pregnancy tests and things like that, you're not looking at either of those. You're not looking at the quantities of either of those. You're looking at a totally different chemical signal. And then, of course, talking about the regulation of digestion, homeostasis of the digestive system, we're going to talk about insulin production. Insulin is produced by the pancreas. So blood glucose levels go up, insulin is produced, and that tells the cell, use glucose, create glycogen. So insulin triggers this to happen in the blood. Not in the blood, in the cells. It travels through the blood. As blood sugar levels diminish, as blood sugar levels drop, the pancreas is going to produce glucagon. So the sugar levels drop, glucagon's released. That says tear apart glycogen, make glucose, and that stabilizes the level of sugar in the body. So it's just, here's where we are. It's like when you're driving a car, and it's all about correcting and then recorrecting. You constantly, as you're driving, are making minor corrections to stay on the road. Hopefully you don't do major overcorrections where you're like, and I got to get in this lane. Now I got to go back this way. And you straighten everything out. Minor corrections bit by bit. Growth itself is regulated by the pituitary gland. This produces human growth hormone, and this controls the rate of muscle and bone growth. You may have heard of human growth hormones being used for doping for Olympics athletes. This was a big issue. It was hard to detect for a while, and then suddenly we're like, oh, wait. Turns out, if you were to extract growth hormone, distill it, and inject it into somebody else, it will cause them to grow muscles and bone very, very quickly. It also wasn't detectable for a while. Then they figured out how to detect it. Turns out, like, everyone was using it. For a while, it wasn't even illegal. A friend of mine got a tumor. He was at the time, he was a naval aviator. And he was in the bar because that's where they would hang out. He was sitting in the bar talking with his squad mates, and a medic happened to be there. And they were all making fun of his hands. They called his call sign was Mitts because he had like big sausage fingers. Really big guy. And the thing is, he was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. He kept doing all of this exercise. Yeah, it was a lot of muscle, but he kept growing. So he happened to run into a medic in the bar, and the medic's like, hey, why don't you come and see me first thing Monday morning? Well, it turned out he had a pituitary tumor that was just overexpressing that growth hormone. They yanked it out through his nose. He couldn't fly after that anymore. But, it was kind of cool. I will give him serious credit. So he and I, we were in college. We went through high school together. We went to college together. Second year of college, he's like, I'm going to join the Navy and be a naval aviator. And I was like, have fun. So he did that, got all of his college paid for, went off, was a naval aviator for about 2 years, had this tumor, and then he was allowed to retire at age like 33. So now he's retired and going back to school on GI Bill and all this other stuff. It's like, man. It's like, yep, my cancer was the greatest thing in my life. They didn't let him keep it. Hormones also control behaviors. You've heard of the fight or flight response, right? So here's what happens. You got these short-term stresses. Something freaks you a snake dangling down from a gutter. Freaks you out. That leads to the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine, and that triggers the fight or flight response. Ultimately, what it does is it triggers an increase in heart rate. Your heart starts beating faster. Your breathing rate increases. That means you're getting more oxygen to your blood, into your cells. You get cardiac muscle contractions. Things are really moving quickly in your body. Your pupils dilate. Your blood pressure and blood glucose levels accelerate. You get more. Glycogen begins to be broken down. What you've done is your body's geared up to produce and use a lot of energy really, really fast. You've all had that feeling before, right? The palpitations. Heck, you might get it before an exam. And then what happens afterwards? Suddenly, you crash. Suddenly, things have changed a lot. Last year, my wife lost her cell phone. We were at Busch Gardens, and she lost her cell phone. Somebody stole it. But I had the Find My Phone app. Now, that's the coolest app ever. You guys played with that? Okay, so I knew exactly that the phone was still in the park somewhere. And I'm going all over. My heart's beating. I'm running. I've got, my heart rate's going very quickly. I can actually hear my blood in my ears. Looking for this phone, pushing the make sound button. Well, it turns out that eventually the person who was carrying it or who picked it up had stuffed it into a cup and put it in the trash can, just to get rid of it, because it kept going off on them. So I found it, and I was so excited. I was like, I have found the phone. I'm like a detective. I found the phone, and I win. And then I sat down for a minute, and I was done. My heart rate returned. No, everything was fine. But I was like, okay, it's time to leave now. I am tired. I can't. Your body goes through a lot of energy really, really quickly with that flight or flight response. But it's all mediated by hormones saying, click, go. Just those two hormones will cause a cascade of reactions throughout the body, making you move faster, making you short-term superhero detective, long-term really worn out. So that is the really, 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 really basics of the endocrine system. If you want to learn more about it, I recommend taking an anatomy and physiology class where we'll get into more systems and more depth about each and every one of these steps. But my job is really just give you a taste of it this year. Any questions? All right.